All right, great. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Greg Rock. I'm the founder of bpminstitute.org and president of Brainstorm Group, and I wanted to welcome you here to Brainstorm Chicago. The innovation workshops that we've been running for the last 2 years came out of feedback from practitioners and folks like yourselves that we had met with when we do our regional events, and wanted to see kind of a different spin on the traditional conference model of talking about a lot of things in theory at a high level, kind of rapid fire 40-minute talks, and really looking to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into these different areas and different capabilities that are now available to you. And so what we really want to do is try to provide some information on state-of-the-art technology, the capabilities that are available there, get you some exposure to the different tools and things that are available, and give you some tangible things that you can leave here with that you can put to work right away. And this session will be no different. And I think this is a great pickup from where we left off yesterday, talking about some of the tools and capabilities and the ability to have supporting documents tied to some of your process maps and models that you're making. And you really have to take a look at the IBM WebSphere family of tools. It's a very formidable lineup of products. The two companies I mentioned, Lombardi was one of the true pioneers in the BPM space, and they were acquired by IBM. Now it's called the Lombardi Edition, and the former CEO and founder of Lombardi will have a word from him virtually through video in a minute. And then iLog was one of the premier companies around the business rules, business decision management space. And so now having these products integrated within the WebSphere suite really is a very, very comprehensive and formidable set of solutions to take a look at. So we're lucky enough to have Bill Hahn with us today as a solution architect with IBM, and Bill is a local Chicago guy and has spoken for us in the past, so we're thrilled to have him back. And Neil Tutil is going to kick off the day for us. And Neil is a BPM business exec with IBM with over 20 years of experience in the space, working with IBM customers and implementing BPM solutions and their initiatives. Came to IBM through Crossroads. If you remember, Crossroads, again, was one of the early companies in the BPM space. And has been through technical development and also held several sales positions with IBM as well. And so we've got a lot of material, some great demos for you. And since I think we only had one person that had been to BlueWorks, we're going to give you kind of a little tour of some of the capabilities through there and some really great tools for you to take a look at. So I can give you a nice round of applause to welcome the folks from IBM.
Great, thanks a lot. Okay, yeah, so my name's Neil Tutil. I'm responsible for the what we call BPM and connectivity for WebSphere in North America. Well, I'll just get started. I'll just leave it at that. What I'm going to try to go through today is talk a little bit about sort of the reason for interest, presumably your interest in BPM, which is the complexity that everyone is dealing with. Just by show of hands, is everyone here from an IT role or well, by show of hands, who's from IT and who would consider themselves line of business? Oh, wow, great. Nice split. Okay, good. Well, that's a real critical component. So it sounds like you guys are already on top of that. The fact that there's in order to do this right, you've got to have a good collaboration between line of business and IT. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then I'm going to focus on some core technologies and how they are used to solve the type of process improvement problems you guys might be facing. So business process management. Here, business process management is often used as an umbrella term. In fact, it's usually used as an umbrella term. In my title, it's an umbrella term. So it's kind of like a category of a variety of different technologies that can be leveraged for the overall concept of process improvement. It's also used for a subset of that category around business process management suites and what kind of capabilities are typically in those suites. So we're going to talk about that here when I talk about the first pattern of success. And then I'm going to talk about business rules management, which is part of that umbrella, but obviously is distinct on its own and has a great value prop outside of how it can be used in the context of flowing through a process and needing to make a decision in the context of a process. So that's really where we get to three, the two of them together. And then I'm going to throw in business events as a separate category, but I'm linking it to business rules management. So I'll talk a little bit about what business events is as distinct from business rules management and how the two of them together are very synergistic in kind of intercepting events that are out there and seeing patterns across those events and then generating actions that may involve decisions, may involve processes, etc. So then the last topic I'll touch on is the notion of visibility. So again, on that whole umbrella term is that ideally, if well, then I want to have dashboards that are giving me some real-time insight into what's going on, as well as my ability to collect statistics over what's going on so I can start doing analytics across my processes over time as well and use that information to help improve those processes. So it's a critical component, but it really deserves its own category because it has value in each of these other steps. And then I'll just talk about next steps, which really is a segue to Bill. All right, so the complexity challenge. I think this graphic may seem familiar, and there's actually statistics that back this up coming out of the issues that we faced in the economy. It's never more true that IT budgets are maybe growing feebly or staying, hopefully at least staying the same and not shrinking, whereas the complexity of what you're being asked to do is really increasing. And there's complexity in technology. I mean, it's great, right, that everybody probably in this room has a smartphone, for example. The idea that I need to now make that a channel for my customers. I need to worry about that from an IT perspective. What is my social networking view of the company? I've got to be monitoring Twitter and Facebook potentially because there can be a lot of harm done to me by word of mouth through those social media channels, as well as I can use that as a marketing channel. It's a whole new set of complexity I didn't have to deal with before from an IT perspective, and I'm dealing with it with a stagnant or even shrinking budget. So there's a challenge, right? Clearly, the challenge there is, it sounds impossible. The only way that can work is if I can get more efficient in what I have to do now so that I can free resources up to really look out and be proactive across the new technologies that are available. Now, if you take that consideration and look at a couple of other studies, I've just got a few of these kind of statistics charts. This comes from a CEO study that we do, that our services organization, GBS, does every 2 years. So this is the 2010 study. And we go out and we talk to CEOs of large companies worldwide. This is over 1,000 CEOs. And we ask them a series of questions and we get information across different industries, across different geographies, and see if we can see patterns, right? Make sure that our roadmap matches what they see as issues and constantly it's a very productive relationship for us, as well as it provides a lot of interesting insights. And I think this one, from a business process improvement perspective, is particularly telling. So these are CEOs saying where they see, what you're seeing in red here is large or to a large or very large extent, and that their industries, that their markets are becoming more volatile, more uncertain, more complex, and more structurally different. So they recognize that all of this change is being thrust upon them, in other words. And they recognize the need to be agile. There's another graph that I didn't get into about how prepared do they feel for that change, and it's less than 50% feel they're capable of managing that change. So that's a huge problem. If you're in one of those companies, that's a problem, right? And you're probably being asked to address that problem, both from a line of business perspective and an IT perspective. However, if you look over here, it's a different study. This is from Bpm Institute. I don't remember what Bpm stands for. But this is measuring agility. So agility is a measure of how well line of business and IT are working together, for example, how quickly your organizations are able to adapt to change and that sort of thing. And then looking at those across industries, again, those businesses that are more agile in those regard, you're seeing 40% higher EPS growth, 45% higher return on investment of IT investments, 45% higher ROI, 10% faster revenue growth, and 2.6 times higher return on capital. So if you put those two together, you can see, boy, I really recognize that I need to do something dramatically different here. I need to be able to be more agile. And boy, if I was, there's a real bottom line impact for me. If that's not me on the right-hand side, that means my competitors are pulling away from me by my inability to manage this. And then again, refer back to the last chart, and we've got ourselves a pretty big problem, right? This is the latest study from Information Week. This is from September 2010. And this is what are the innovation plans for CIOs across the Fortune 500 companies. And you can see the absolute number one choice is making business processes more efficient. So there's a perfect storm happening here that suggests that, boy, we ought to really be looking at that. So congratulations for being in the room, except for this is exactly where you need to be, where you want to be. It's exciting as well, but there's really an imperative to do this right. So clearly, I'm probably preaching to the processes everywhere. So even organizations that don't have a strategy for business process management are handling processes already, right? It's just a matter of how well are they handling, how much visibility do they have in it, do they know those processes are as efficient as they could be, right? And are they able to change their processes as the markets change, or to go out and go after new opportunity, or even react to a competitive threat? Because they're doing this anyway, it sure makes sense to be able to get some control over this so they can answer yes to those other questions. I said I wouldn't have that many more statistics. I think this is my last one, but this is an interesting one. Looking at from a Tech CEO Council report, almost $500 billion estimated to be lost in Fortune 500 companies just through process inefficiencies. And extrapolating that to the Global 2000, you can see that it's a pretty enormous number, right? And then governments apparently are one can imagine there's a lot of inefficiency in government. If we could attack business processes in government and make them more efficient, we'd all be better off, obviously, especially with the budget crisis. So let's look at a company. Lincoln Trust is a company that manages IRAs, as well as they can manage a lot of, they do the bookkeeping, et cetera, for a lot of 401k plans. And their challenge was a lot of these processes are very manual intensive. Their interaction with their customers, setting up new accounts or making changes, very manual intensive, very paper intensive. And they recognized it was very, very inefficient. And it's not a good market to be inefficient because it's a very competitive market as well. And they're a relatively small company, and a private company in this space. Well, I mean, hundreds of employees, but you know, relatively small compared to the cities of the world. Citigroup. They actually tried to do a BPM initiative, or a process improvement initiative, and it was just line of business focus. And it really went nowhere. It failed completely, and it failed, I would say it failed because they didn't collaborate between line of business and IT. But it got into this analysis paralysis thing, and some of you may be aware of that idea as you start to try to tackle this problem, which is, you know, how do you eat an elephant kind of a problem, right? It can be a real challenge to get, you know, to get past the enormity of what you're trying to do, to get around boiling the ocean when you see everything is broken, and how do you start? And so, and I don't mean to pick on these guys, because obviously they're profitable and they're a very good company, but they recognized that they had problems. So when they tried to do it again, this time they did it with a collaboration between line of business and IT, and they decided to start, okay, where's the most visible problem? The most visible problem for them was this paper overload. It seemed obvious that the first thing they needed to do was like, let's wrestle that first. So the first thing they did is they put an ECM system in place, an enterprise content management system, so that these documents could come in, that may come in folders that would become virtual folders. And then once that was now in an electronic form, it could be searched for, and then it could be leveraged in the context of business process management. So what they did is they did that first, and it had huge impact right away, right? It just made an obvious advantage to the business. But kind of simultaneously, they started doing this process discovery phase, this leveraging both the subject matter experts, which are typically in the line of business, as well as on IT sides, because obviously IT systems are very critically involved in any one of these processes, and started modeling out, getting a buy-in from all of the various stakeholders on what do my processes really look like today, what are my as-is processes, and how can I improve those processes to get to my to-be world. And they leveraged some software that you're going to see later on, and I'll be talking about in a little bit of detail in this presentation, called IBM Bpm Blueworks. Actually, it was called Blueprint at the time. That was software that we inherited originally from Lombardi, which is a cloud-based, collaborative process discovery environment that allows people to collaborate in real time over the web. And then also there's social networking capability in there, so I can have instant collaboration. I can see who else is on. I can ask questions about that. And through the exercise of actually documenting and improving the process, I'm actually building out my process repository that becomes the standard within my company. And that's what Lincoln Trust did, and so many other companies have done. And then from that, start to pick, and I think, sorry, I went ahead. the first 15 processes they picked to start to automate those processes, leveraging now the electronic information, so carrying those virtual folders, making sure they went to the right people depending on what documents are in those folders, so it's going to be very dynamic, but what documents are in those folders will kick off individual different processes. Different people within the organization have expertise to handle each one of those processes, so those come all in this context of this virtual folder, so that people can start working consistently, efficiently of the processes as dictated by what the customer is asking for through the forms that they sent in that have now been digitized and are now searchable and available online. And obviously it was a huge success. So far, it started in 2007. The first bringing in the ECM system and doing that whole imaging capture and everything took pretty much the year of 2007. 2008 is really when they started to kick off the whole process improvement exercise around the digitizing of these documents. And so what they've seen so far, which is as of the end of 2010, $2.2 million in savings to date, 120% ROI on the software purchases within the first year. And then you can see that a lot of what drove this was customer complaints on losing documents and, where is my process and that sort of thing, because it was all very manual. They had all these shadow, I don't know if this will ring a bell, shadow processes that individuals had built up in either Access, like little Access database applications, little Excel spreadsheets that they would use to kind of manage the process and manage, what was going on with all of these documents, right? So it would be very ad hoc, very inconsistent from one rep to another, and it would be impossible from a management perspective to really get insight into what's going on and how can it be improved. To today's world, which is, some significant benefits. And so this is just my last chart, and it really is just an eye-opener. It gets back to my intro, which is in the times of stagnant budgets, then clearly just a 1 sigma shift in my process improvement can provide such huge benefits to me, because these processes tend to be very inefficient and very coarse-grained inefficiencies that just oftentimes just in discovering the process, like some of those Lincoln Trust processes didn't actually require a process engine to help, right? It was just a matter of honestly realizing, why are we even doing that? Because oftentimes in these processes, they grow organically over time. So steps that are in the process may have made sense 5 years ago. They no longer make sense, but nobody realizes that, right? The process is working, so people are doing things that they needn't do, perhaps. And maybe they're not doing it in the most efficient way, so there's a lot of rework going on. It works, but it doesn't work as well as it could. So simply understanding that and saying, well, why don't we do it this way instead, doesn't necessarily require a process engine for managing that and can still show some huge benefit. So there's some real benefits to be gained, and then what this chart is really showing is that can free up budget that is otherwise being kind of wasted over here in maintaining existing systems for going out and building a Droid app, for example, or doing something new projects that can be freed up because of the ability to just make some fairly simple changes in processes can have some huge benefit. All right, so let's look at these 4 patterns for success. So I've got them all here on one diagram. So in this case, again, I'm not using business process management as an umbrella term. I'm talking specifically about the orchestration of people and systems in the context of an overall business process. So what does that look like, and how would that work? And hopefully if I'm automating that so that I'm gaining control over that and therefore visibility over top of it as well. So business event processing, which is represented by this funnel here, is really situational awareness of events occurring. So an event is, a customer calling in, or maybe a hit on your website, or a timer going off that you're in danger of missing an SLA. All of those would be events. And any one event can be interesting and can kick off a process, but what can be very interesting is a collection of events over a period of time and looking for patterns across that. And maybe even the absence of an event. Like A, B happens, D happens, C didn't happen. That's interesting. I need to do something about that. That can be difficult to capture. And that's what business event processing does. And then, of course, business rules management says, okay, now that I've got all of this information, what do I do? So it's codifying best practices so that I do it consistently and I do it according to my best practice every time. But it also puts it in a place where that as things change, and these decisions may be impacted by regulations depending on your industry, as those regulations change, I need to be able to, as a process expert, typically not an IT expert, but a process expert or an industry expert. I need to be able to go in there and change those decisions and then make sure that those changes are reflected consistently across the applications needed, across the processes that need it, or even in self-service websites, making sure that I'm doing that consistently every time. That's what a business rules management system does. And then, of course, once I've got all that in place, to have visibility and analytics across that, pretty much role-based, right? So from an executive level, I've got a really good high-level understanding of what's going on in my infrastructure and how I'm doing this month versus last month, this area of the country versus this area of the country, as well as from an operational perspective, if I'm one of the people that are actually working in these processes or managing people that work in the processes, am I getting information I need to make sure that I'm doing that efficiently, that I can redirect work as necessary depending on what's going on, depending on what kind of issues may be affecting me at that point in time. So let's look at business process management first. So I like to think of this as the 4 cornerstones of process improvement. I am hoping, actually, it's a little washed out here, but you can read everything. I am hoping that you will begin to judge business process management systems by these 4 criteria. So they're coarse-grained, they're big picture ideas, but let me explain them. And simplicity is complexity. Nobody's looking for complexity, right? But I think in business process management, this actually means something very specific. If I'm going to successfully have a process improvement program, if I'm going to really see this and embrace this as a strategic initiative in my organization, then I really need that collaboration between line of business and IT. My expertise of the process likely exists in line of business. And I can't expect those people to become programmers in order for them to be able to, for me to be able to leverage their expertise operationally so that I can improve these processes. So it's got to stop where the line of business is throwing over, functional specs, functional design specs to IT, and then IT is implementing it, because I need these cycles to change much more frequently. I'm expecting the process to be deployed and that I'm going to change that process. I'm expecting that change. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm expecting to have to change it. I'm going to change it for business reasons rather than technology reasons. If I'm going to be able to do that successfully, I've got to make sure I'm putting tools in the hands of my line of business that they can use, right? That don't require them to become Java experts, certainly, or even have a programming framework. They need to be able to work with tools that intuitively are graphical and represent the processes, represent the problem the way they're used to talking about it to their customers, to their peers, and we can leverage that and get that into the system. So that's why simplicity is so important here. If I can't provide that, then I can't really get line of business involved, and I'm just saying words, if that's the case. However, power, right? I still need power. I've got to think that if I'm turning this into a program, if it's not just a departmental workflow that I'm talking about, but I'm actually, it may be, but I'm broadening this into, this is how we approach this kind of problem. We need to be more agile as a corporation. This is, an edict from above. Then I'm clearly going to have some mission critical processes here. I've got to make sure that whatever infrastructure I'm running it on is rock solid, right? That it'll scale up vertically, it'll scale horizontally, that it'll fail over and I won't lose transactions and all that stuff that definitely matters from a T perspective to support this initiative, right? Now, married to this, and I've been talking a lot about this, is visibility. If I've got my line of business now directly involved in this, we're arm in arm in this project, not just initially, not just, okay, we're going to do this and then thanks, that was great, but we're going to continue to do this over time, then from a line of business perspective, I'm going to want visibility into what I'm doing. I'm going to want to be able to get feedback on how well that worked, right? So I'm going to want dashboards that have the SLAs, that have the key performance indicators that I understand, that are relevant to the process, not relevant to the IT structure supporting the process, but the process itself, so that I'm getting that information and I can use that information not only to see how I'm doing, but to improve the process over time. Because I'm going to be getting insights from this that I don't otherwise have, because I'm probably flying a little bit blind right now if I don't have something like this in place. And then finally, and I think this is critically important in the same context, when I'm talking governance here, I'm actually talking about a subset of governance that I'm going to call process governance. So SOA governance is very important. If I'm talking about mission critical processes and I'm using services in the context of a process, then I need to make sure I've got governance around those services, who can create them, where are they used, what's the impact if I make this change, all of that stuff, and that's SOA governance. That's critically important. That's not what I'm referring to here. I'm kind of assuming that's in place. That's critically important, and I agree. But what I'm talking about here is process governance. What do I mean by process governance? And it gets back to this whole notion if I'm doing this right, and I'm really involved in line of business and IT, so that I am building these processes, I'm putting visibility in the process context, and I'm expecting that process to change, then I'm creating a problem for myself here if I don't directly address it. And that problem is, I'm going to have multiple of these processes running simultaneously. I'm going to have to version new instances of the process, and I'm going to have to get those up and running. I'm going to have to understand the impact of that, like how many instances of that process do I already have running on version 1? What do I want to do with those instances as I'm deploying to version 2, right? Do I want to start redirecting some of them down the new process path? Do I need to do that? Maybe it's based on new decisions, new regulations that have come up. And how do I manage that type of environment? So it's actually the governance of how do I manage this kind of rapid change and kind of rapid fire deployment and then redeployment of my processes in an environment that both IT and line of business can understand. Well, I wouldn't be saying all this. Oh, yes, question. Well, can everybody hear the question or do? Okay. And what you're really doing is underlining the need for that line of business and IT collaboration. If it's an IT project, you're right, and we see that a lot, right? Not only you need line of business involved, you need executive business sponsorship. And for you to have that succeed, like you've got to have somebody with that kind of insight. So we can help with that, and we can show there's a lot of studies that can prove out why they should, right? Like there's a lot of benefit to be had. But what's incumbent on you from IT and you from line of business is that first project be a success, right? And that be implemented fairly quickly, like I'm saying 90 days or less from beginning to end, implemented with a tangible benefit that's visible to the business. So not an IT benefit, not saying, yeah, I know you can't tell anything, but we are so much more efficient now because we took 1,000 Java lines of code out of here, and I expect that to really help our maintenance going forward. That's not what I'm talking about. It's a visible change to the business where they can actually see that there's been a positive change based on a business process improvement project. And that then keeps that executive ready, because a lot of times when you're dealing with the subject matter experts in the line of business, they've got a whole lot of stuff to do, right? And they may be reluctant to do this. So oftentimes change can be frightening to anybody, right? And line of business organizations are often the people involved in the process, and they're the ones that are gluing it together if it's broken, right? So they can feel can happen that they feel a little bit uneasy about a lot of people understanding what's going on and improving that process, and maybe I'm out of a job. So there's those issues that can happen. That doesn't happen, by the way, because there's just so much to do that those fears quickly run away, and the people that are on these teams tend to become heroes, and they elevate their role within the organization because they're saving money or they're improving customer satisfaction. There's so much to be gained by doing this, but there is some initial fear. And without that line of business sponsorship at the executive level, it can wither on the vine. So I've got a couple of those points at the end, but I think that's a really good point. This is not just a technology problem. You want the technology to be your partner, but there's a whole methodology involved in here, and there's a whole paradigm shift that is requires communication within the organization. And the best way of doing that, like Frank Sinatra said, success is the best revenge. If I can get that 90-day project to prove tangible benefit, that allows me to fund the next and the next and the next and turn my project into a program. And again, I wouldn't be saying all this as passionately as I am if I didn't think that we had a pretty good solution here. So you may not be aware, we had a big conference in Las Vegas we have every year called Impact. And at Impact, we made a major announcement in the BPM space. And the announcement we made was Ibm Business Process Manager. And what Ibm Business Process Manager, version 7.5, what it is it is the convergence of something called WebSphere Lombardi Edition. Those of you familiar with Lombardi, this was TeamWorks, and then after IBM acquired Lombardi, it became WebSphere Lombardi Edition, which it became hosted on WAS and WebSphere Application Server, and got blue washed, and then we started. On the right-hand side, WebSphere Process Server was the product that IBM had built up organically in this market and released originally in 2005. WebSphere Process Server, again, running on top of WebSphere Application Server, a full SOA backbone, as well as BPM characteristics as well for enterprise scale of business process management improvement. What this didn't do so well was the simplicity stuff I talked about, but it had the power locked down, right? It was difficult. The tools were difficult to use from a line of business perspective, though IT people tend to really like them. Over here, you have tooling and thought process that it was really great at simplifying the message, involving line of business, and being able to deploy process improvement projects very, very quickly. Typically, those projects were very human-centric in nature. The more that they required interaction with systems, the less applicable that was not where most of the focus of this product was based. What's happened with 7.5 is the best of both of these are now in one product. And I don't mean that we put two in a box and said, okay, great, guys, now you've got everything you need. It's up to you to integrate it. I mean truly integrated, so that now the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that. Here's the architecture. And this is my only architecture chart, so we can even call it marketecture if you like, if that makes everybody feel more comfortable. But I'm excited about the design. It's basically 4 components to Process Manager. On the left-hand side, Process Designer is that tooling that's really aimed at the business analyst on the line of business side to be able to map out my process in Bpm, to hit a playback button and immediately see how that process is behaving, start to work on what my user interfaces are with my users, playback of initially, oh, you need this over here. Like it's this notion of playback is that this is iterative and constant, that I am never any further than one click away from being able to deploy what I'm running, and it deploys instantaneously. So, okay, great. Yeah, so it's really powerful, really kind of exciting stuff. On the right-hand side, the other tool called Integration Designer is really the tool for the IT side, whereas I may need in here some straight-through processing. I may need to update a customer record, and the reality of my IT department is I've got 4 different systems that have customer master over acquisitions, right? So that's actually a process itself to be able to do that. And I need to be able to do that transactionally because I can't update one customer and have it fail everywhere else because I have to have consistent image of my customers everywhere. Stuff I don't really want to worry about here. I want to think about, I updated my customer and I'm moving on. But update my customer can actually be a straight-through process that requires some development effort over here, right? The idea is Process Center then becomes a central registry and repository for development time so I can immediately share those assets constantly. So I can start, I could basically create, I need a service here that's going to update customer, and I'm going to be giving it this business object, I'm going to get this business from it. I continue working. I can do my playback, I can do everything that I need to do, even though that service doesn't exist yet. Meanwhile, simultaneously, I've got all of the information I need to be able to start building that service, to be able to test it, to deploy it, and then the deployed service naturally just gets into this playback process, and now I'm working with the actual service rather than the stubbed out service that I described that I needed in the first place. So, right. And the other aspect of this is this also becomes how I manage my runtime environment. So as I'm playing back these snapshots of my processes that involve both the IT assets and the line of business assets, and I deploy those, I may have test servers, I may have QA servers, I may have different development servers in different places. Process Center also manages all of that. So as I'm deploying new versions of my process, I am managing it from an operational perspective, again, from one place. Yeah. No, it's called Process Center, and it's part of Business Process Manager.
Well, what you just said is the very reason why we have consolidated because in the past there was a perception that multiple Bpm agents, now we have essentially I'll be covering that.
Yeah, I'm probably giving you more detail than you need actually, because this is actually very simple and very intuitive, but this is built into the product. So that repository called Process Center is part of Process Manager. It's a very just natural way that you are working with this. Is anybody here a Lombardi customer already or used Lombardi tooling? Well, then you're already familiar with Process Center from that perspective if you're on 6.2 or above. Or no. Oh, okay. Well, the point would be then, if you're not aware, you've got it and you weren't aware of it, because Process Designer is always connected to this. So every time you're working with it, you're actually working with Process Center under the covers. What's new with 7.5 is that over here, this was the tooling for WPS, WebSphere Process Server. Didn't have that concept. Now it does. So if I was a WebSphere Process Server customer, was anybody here a WebSphere Process Server customer? Okay, well, if you were, then you're working the same way too, but what's new to you is that I've now got this shared repository of information. I can define a business object here, it's instantly available over here, so I've got this natural collaboration happening between line of business and IT using tools I'm already familiar and comfortable with that are role specific to what I'm doing, but there's no import-export, there's no two versions of the truth. There's no reconciliation that has to go on. This is all real-time with a shared repository of these assets, just different views based on the user. So I've got a simplified view here that is what I need to be able to do my job. I've got a more detailed view over here because now I'm dealing with WSDLs and SOAP and all kinds of other stuff that I have to from an IT perspective, but that complexity doesn't bubble up here and make these process models so complex that I can no longer, from a line of business perspective, even understand the process, let alone improve it. So it's a complicated problem to solve. We've, I believe, solved it, and uniquely so, through this notion of process center in the middle and then deploying to process server runtime, which is the combination of the two capabilities, the two products in one. Cool. Sure.
So when Neil asked y'all, who's from the business, who's from IT, you got a really good mix here, roughly half business and half IT. So Lombardi and for the last 10 years done a fantastic job of creating tools to facilitate
Lombardi's done a great job over the last 10 years of building the left half of this picture, the process designer, which is a tooling, a visual view of the process, much like you might see in something like Visio, that's not intimidating to the business. So they've done for the last 10 years a great way of building out BPM in a way that's engaging and simple for the business. On the right half of this diagram is what IBM has been doing best of breed for the last 10 plus years, which is all of the IT-friendly integration middleware space, the IT half of the equation. So this new announcement, this new BPM 7.5 that Neil's talking about, what it does is it makes it easier for IT to collaborate with business. It makes it easier for the IT folks building that IT stuff to collaborate with the business folks building the business process out. And as Neil mentioned, it's all seamlessly integrated. So I think of it as the value of this, the business value, is that now IT and business can work together more effectively.
Right.
Thanks, Neil.
Sure.
Yeah, you'll be seeing that in the demo, the business process templates. We have plenty of those.
I love your questions. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good idea, right? And we've got that too. And here's just an example of what I said. I probably said it with so many words, I probably should have just gone through this chart. This is actually a view into, these are both Eclipse tools, by the way, which doesn't mean anything to the line of business people, so I apologize for even saying that. But keep in mind that Eclipse came as a development tool interface, so there'd be common look and feel, common way of doing things from an IT perspective, but it's a very IT-looking interface. But there's a lot of advantage to having a common framework that Eclipse provides. This is Eclipse too, but it looks nothing like an Eclipse space. This is the line of business space. So what I've got over here is I've got all my artifacts. You're going to see this in the demo. Phil Gilbert, who is the head of our BPM business, likens this to iTunes. You've got different kinds of things, and you drag and drop from here. Just the way you kind of organize your iTunes. You got smart folders, kind of the way you organize your iTunes as well. Your big palette here is BPMN. So I'm sure everybody in this room is familiar with BPMN, so that's the modeling notation. I drag and drop from my palette and I build out my process flow here. On the right-hand side is, I may have that service that I talked about here. I've got that in my process center. Over here, I actually build out that service where I'm linking maybe through adapters into SAP, for example. I'm configuring all of that. I'm doing all of that work over here. When I'm done testing, debugging, etc., that goes back in the process center, and then I'm using that now, but it's still this box here. It just still looks like that. I recognize that this is something called an advanced integration service that my IT guys have built for me. But in the meantime, I don't have to know that complexity in order for me to be able to do my job. I just need to know that this exists and that it works. So that's basically the idea between the two sides of the house. Now, if we look at BPM, and I'm going to talk about something called full spectrum BPM. There is a wide array of processes inside your organization. And I've put them in three categories here. And actually, the last video I'm going to show you is a customer in Portugal, where they actually helped us crystallize this vision, honestly. They categorize, and you can categorize your processes in these three categories, essentially. And there's a spectrum. It's not like a rigid line. But basically, on the left-hand side here, the ones that I've got are very, very complex processes. So this is involving a lot of your systems of record, right? There's a lot of straight-through processing here. There'll probably be some manual involvement, largely on exceptions or maybe approvals above a certain amount and everything, but largely this is a lot of straight-through processing. You're trying to manage as much straight-through processing as you can because there's typically a lot of volume running through here. This is absolutely mission critical, very complex, very IT involvement, a lot of IT involvement, but honestly the number of these processes, the physical number of these processes in your organization are small. Right? There may be thousands of instances running at any one period in time, right? Lots and lots of these, but very few different processes that meet this category. There's a much larger set of processes that are slightly still complex, probably a lot of more human interaction, therefore we need much more involvement with the line of business on these processes because to understand those processes and improve those processes probably involve a lot of how we do work inside our organization as well as what systems are we using to do that work, right? So this is where I really need a lot of that collaboration with line of business and IT. And everything that I just talked about and Bill talked about with BPM Process Manager is really focused here. But there's a whole raft we call long-tail processes in every organization that you're probably not attacking with any technology, that IT is not involved in whatsoever. Things like expense approval or travel, setting up travel for things like that. Typically, these kind of processes, and depending on your organization, there may be some that are even, customer service related, they're email based, they're, phone call based, they're people using spreadsheets or access databases. IT's not involved because IT's got this big backlog of stuff. They're fairly low. They may be high volume, but they're low transaction volume, right? There may be many of them, but they're, kind of one-off things. So it's very difficult for an organization to really gain insight into how many of those are we doing them right, are we doing them consistently, and that sort of thing. Creating any kind of control over that is very difficult. And if customers are involved in that, that can be a problem. That can be a customer satisfaction problem. I'll try not to use any names here, but there's a company in the West, as part of their service, they actually provide devices to customers. And getting the device is very, very simple through the website. Ordering the device is very, very simple through the website. And usually everything works fine. But when it doesn't work and the customer calls, they have to formulate a SWAT team to figure out what happened internally, right? Where did things break down, right? And, like it went into the SAP system, but it didn't get into Siebel. Oh, okay, so why didn't it get into Siebel? And they're doing all of that work. And what they often will do is they'll just ship another device out to the customer, right? Just to get the customer happy. And then they're shipping multiple devices, and then they get the returns, and it's very, very expensive, very, very inefficient. And it's how do you handle that? You could look at it and say, okay, we've got an integration problem. The failure between SAP and Siebel should never happen. Let's attack that from an IT perspective. But, all the line of business people who are involved, who are feeling the pain of this problem, right? Because they're the ones that customers are calling. The customers are feeling the pain. They're not going to see the benefit of that for some time, right? Let's look at the process of how do we manage that SWAT team? How do we do that? How do we make sure we do that right? What are the steps involved in doing that? And let's put some control over that while we fix the underlying problem that maybe will improve that process over time. From an IBM perspective, and we've already talked a little bit about BlueWorks Live because that's what Lincoln Trust used initially to start to try to gain a grasp of what their problems are, do the process discovery. There are capabilities in BlueWorks Live that allow me to actually automate some of those long-tail processes where it's not really worth building up a whole infrastructure here, so I can quickly create a simple workflow or a checklist type of process and then gain visibility and insight over those processes, as well as build out the discovery and the as-is and to-be models that end up becoming these processes over here.
All in the cloud.
All in the cloud, all in the cloud with nothing to install. And very, very inexpensive. And you'll see that in the demo, so thank you, Bill. But that's actually my segue into that. So if you think about process discovery, and these may look familiar, these are actual photographs of how does this get done. When you finally get one of these initiatives in your organization, say, we can't keep doing it this way. We've got to improve our processes. And like I said, you got to bring the subject matter experts who are typically in the line of business. They typically have very important jobs. Not that IT doesn't have important jobs. They have important jobs too. But getting these guys to get into a room and not be taken away by their BlackBerries and by somebody saying, hey, you got to come. I'm sorry, there's a 2-hour meeting at the CEO's office and you're invited. You want to get these guys in a room and you want to try to figure out, get everybody to agree on what the process is, and that will be contentious. Because people will have their understanding of the process, and they'll have a very deep understanding of what they do or what their department does or their organization does, and they may have pretty good understanding of what goes on before they get the widget and what goes on afterwards, right? It may be Yet nobody in the organization truly understands at a detailed level the end-to-end process, and that's why you need something like this. So you see conference rooms where there's butcher paper up on the wall and people drawing stuff, or like in this example, a whiteboard where they're cleverly using color-coded Post-it notes and turning them on the side for decisions to try to get everybody to either agree on what the process truly is or get close enough before you lose everybody that you go, okay, well, here we are. And then you scrap it all down, you get it in a form, you send it out to everybody and make sure you get everybody's buy-in that yes, indeed, that's the case. And then you try to do the whole exercise again to improve the process. Not very efficient, right? But you can't really improve something until you can understand it. And so this is kind of like a requirement, right? Except that what BlueWorks Live does is it basically turns this into a virtual whiteboard. It creates a collaborative environment with instant feedback over the web, through the cloud, to be able to have collaborative process discovery across, this is the best screenshot for it, but you're going to see it in the demo. So you'll see it in the demo, where I can start at a very high level. I can start with these milestones, these big animal picture, we do this, and then we do this, and then we do this, and if I need to, let's put this over here, I can do all that in real time on the web. People don't even have to be in the same room. They don't even have to be in the same country. We've got companies that have deployed this globally. I'll talk about one of them on the next slide. You're going to need a microphone, I think, because if we're recording this, you're going to keep interrupting me. You're going to turn on the mic.
The screenshot, you were real happy with the screenshot. So just to complement what you said about the screenshot, imagine the kind of tool that you would spend thousands and thousands of dollars for and install on your desktop at your desk. Well, with this, you don't have to install anything on your desk, and you don't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars, and you essentially can do all your modeling in a web browser without installing anything. So that's the kind of stuff you'll see at the demo.
Yeah, and you're going to see it in the demo. So we've got lots of companies using this. Citigroup, I mentioned them before, they use this worldwide as well. I'll talk about Aviva. Aviva is a global insurer because I think it's an interesting story. Similar to what Lincoln Trust tried to do, only they went a little further. They recognized the need for process improvement to the point that they actually hired a consulting company to come in. They had 14 consultants come in to interview people. They couldn't take them into the room and do the butcher block paper stuff, so they actually interviewed them at their desks and everything. They compiled all of this. It took about 6 to 8 weeks. They put it into HTML forms and posted it into an internal SharePoint site so that everybody could look and see, yes, whether that was true. And it turned out, no, it wasn't true. It turned out that what people were describing is probably how the process was supposed to work, but that's not actually how it worked. And so, this whole exercise had to get turned around and done again. So that another 6 to 8 week exercise, they reposted everything to the SharePoint. And again, what Viva realized was this is not sustainable. This is too expensive. I think it was costing, I don't want to just throw out numbers. I recall $100,000 a month. Do you happen to remember what it was costing Aviva? I don't remember. A big number to pay for these external experts to come in and do a process re-engineering effort. But what they really wanted was process improvement, right? They wanted they wanted to be able to continually improve, and they knew this was not a sustainable structure, right? So they were ripe to hear the message about BlueWorks Live. And they deployed BlueWorks Live originally in their quality management systems group, a small team, just working with processes in that group. It has since ballooned out, so now it is a global initiative. There's 500 authors of BlueWorks Live globally and 5,000 users, and it is now the central repository for how they do process throughout their organization. And they went from 14 people to 2 people part-time that manage this global infrastructure, which is, there's no infrastructure, as Bill points out, because it's all in the cloud. And they went from an 8-week cycle to nearly instantaneous cycle. So you're getting instantaneous feedback with the subject matter expert about what changes need to be made, and that's immediately logged with all the documentation in the repository, which becomes your central repository for process within your organization. Okay, so that was business process management. Let's look at business rules management. So business rules management is improving the quality and consistency of the decisions and then being able to leverage those decisions wherever necessary. So within applications, within processes, a web app is an application, but so for even web self-service, just to make sure that whenever I need to make a decision around this criteria, these parameters, I'm doing it consistently according to best practices every time. So if you think about business rules similar to process, you have them already. You have them embedded in applications. You have them in documents where you hire new employees and they get a big set of binders. The rules are embedded in those binders. They may not be up to date, but that's where they are, where they're learning them. They're in tribal knowledge. They're in people's heads, right? Your experts know these things. And you go to the expert when you have one of these tricky decisions that have to be made because they understand the repercussions of what that may mean or what the parameters are or what other information they need to be able to make that decision. And then it can be embedded in your processes. If you've already got processes, you may be embedding those rules inside the process, which makes sense, except if I need those rules in more than one process or I need them outside of processes entirely, right? So the notion is if I can harvest that information into a rule repository, and we have tools that help you do that, but if I can harvest that, once I've got a rule repository, then again, from that simplicity idea I talked about before, I have tooling in the hands of the experts, typically in the line of business again, around what are the parameters of these rules, because they're not IT rules, they're the rules that I run my business on. And then I have an efficient server that can execute these rules and then can be called as a service in the appropriate context, from a process, from an application, from the web, etc. So this is really kind of the reverse now. Now that that's there, the idea is that what these rules become are something we call decision services. And so they're available decision services that then I can call in context in different processes, inside applications. There's one place, one source of truth, and then I've got user tools aimed at my user community that can manage this with full governance on, what do these rules look like? When did we change them? What's the impact of this change? Full regression analysis and everything. Working with IT, obviously. You don't necessarily want business users to change your production system, but that's a governance decision. I can change in the QA and then I can do full regression testing before I move it out into my production system. But the point is I can make these changes quickly rather than going into code inside my application and making those changes that can typically take weeks or months potentially because I've got to look for all the impact of making those changes versus isolating in a rule repository. So when I talk about tooling, there's really there's four kind of flavors of it depending on the types of rules. There's the idea where I'm basically working in natural language. And it's basically a very logical set of decisions that I'm making based on a vocabulary that comes with the tool but that I build up over time so that I'm working with terms that I'm already using that have meaning to me and have meaning inside these rules. Decision tables like Excel. In fact, this runs in Excel. So that I can have, when I've got a variety of a matrix of criteria that I need to evaluate, I can put them essentially in a spreadsheet. Scorecards are really the notion of where it's imperfect information and different information I may be using, but it's the collection of that information that I'm making a decision on. Think about your credit score, for example. It's that kind of a set of rules, right? There's a variety of different criteria that they're evaluating, but it all comes to one score. Many people could get to that score for different reasons, and that's the idea of a scorecard. And then finally, a decision tree is that I'm always making a binary choice, and eventually I get to a leaf, which is one and only one type of decision. So all of those are valid ways of describing a rule. So I have tooling that allows me to work in that environment that's most natural for that type of decision. But even more importantly is that I'm working with desktop software that I'm familiar with, like a euphemism for Office. I'm probably using Office today, so my best practices, my rules, actually, my documentation for my rules is actually also my development environment. So they're never out of sync, right? I'm working within the Word document that I end up printing that becomes the manual that actually that are actually operational decisions that move as a decision service and get executed in the runtime. Similarly with Excel. Okay, so my first customer video. Let me click on this and then while it's loading. So this is, these guys are in Australia, the Transport Accident, Commission. And so they manage, well, I'll let them tell you.
Our greatest challenge for the agencies is that we receive a large volume of invoices from our service providers, and we receive close to 95% of our invoices on paper. And those invoices can total up to $3 billion a year in liabilities for our organisations. And this is an area that we haven't seen any business process automation for close to 30 years.
The main business challenge that we actually wanted to overcome was to improve the payment to our treatment providers and also improve the efficiencies and productivity in our agents.
We are now going through a process of where we're trying to automate automate the processing of those invoices and apply complex business rules to ensure that we get the right outcome for the organisations and for our providers. We took the approach to ensure that this program was led by the business, and we've involved the business every step of the way.
One of the key lessons that has been learnt by the business is the benefits of being able to collaborate closely with IT. They actually explained to us what were the tools that they were going to use and the benefit of those tools.
One of the key pillars of our IT transformation strategy is to provide the systems to enable the business, give the power back to the business without the need for IT all the time. So we determined very early in the program that the IBM iLog software was the best product out there for us to be able to implement all of the complex rules that we needed to be able to process these invoices. So it was a natural fit for our organisations to include IBM iLog in the WebSphere suite.
We've had an immediate impact. We have seen an increase in the timeliness of payment by treatment providers, increases in efficiencies within our agents, and at the moment we are actually achieving 84 to 85% straight-through processing.
Our users love the system. They've been given the ability to do the higher value work that they've wanted to do in the past. We're now releasing the program into TAC at the June this year after having seen the great benefits it's provided to WorkSafe.
TAC providers such as physiotherapists, hospitals, doctors, a whole range of allied health professionals will benefit greatly from the TAC and WorkSafe utilising the same rules. It will mean that there will be synergies and that they won't have to deal with what they may call the bureaucracy. So it's a great opportunity for the TAC to move itself from an outdated, cumbersome system to a more web-based solution.
If our systems aren't there, if our business is not there, people don't get paid. They don't get paid their earnings that we're replenishing for them because they can no longer work. So what we do has great responsibility.
I often feel like it means more if you hear a customer say it. But there's great examples like that all over. These guys talked at Impact as well. Oops. Oh, shoot. There we go. Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. The question is it only in automating the process, or I guess does it have value to the business on its own? And it's interesting that they talk process. The process they're talking about is doing this before they had a business rules management system, and how did they do that, which is very paper-based and very manual intensive. So when they talk about straight-through processing from a business rules perspective, it's pulling out all those decisions from people's heads and documents and putting it into a system that can then do this more automatically. So the people are still involved, but they're doing value-added work rather than the mundane stuff and making sure they're doing everything correctly. So when they're talking about process improvement, that's how they improve their internal process. They're not actually saying they're embedding it in a process engine. I expect them to, but really this success was purely implementing a business rules management system. Yeah. You mean internally, how IBM is using this technology? Wow, that's a good. We are using it internally, and you can see from the kind of problems that we have, how we started before the Lombardi acquisition, why we started IT first, because I forget how many applications we had running, like 15,000 applications, most of them mainframe based, so that we had a lot of processes that were not very efficient from the point of view of getting new releases out, our customer support. I think we have great customer support and we've got lots of happy customers, but we recognize that we had, our systems clearly had grown organically. Think about it, we're a high technology company that's 100 years old. That's not a whole lot of them out there. So we've got some legacy systems that are pretty dramatic that we had to deal with. So we dealt with it from that perspective first. Let's look at we're not going to sunset any of those, though we did. We have significantly thousands less applications now than we did in the past. But what we really looked at is let's start taking this functionality, let's start exposing this functionality as services and start looking at these interactions with our customers as processes and actually instantiate the processes using our software, leveraging these services in context, and then exposing it through our portal, our own portal, so that our customers can do a lot of self-service and things like that. And if you've been an IBM customer for some time, probably over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, you've noticed, I hope, distinctly more efficient interaction with IBM along those things. So we've absolutely embraced this. If that was your question, I don't know if... Oh yeah, well, well, we have those. We have those too. Actually, our CIO, so he's our internal IT guy, right? So IBM's own IT department, his CIO, he does a great talk. I've heard him talk, and he talks about the problem that I just did, just a cursory example. And he's got statistics, and he's just a phenomenal guy to speak, to hear speak. However, there's always the possibility that you would go, yeah. Obviously, IBM's going to say that because they're trying to sell me IBM software. So that's why we use other customers. And so it's not that we're not doing it too. We are doing it too. But when we can get other customers to say it, like if you go to, I don't know if anybody here went to Impact. Anybody go to Impact? Well, we had over 350 customer speakers at Impact. So not only can you go to Impact and get education on by industry, so there's a business track as well as a technology track. What are the best thinkers? The analysts are there. There's a lot of great people there, as well as IBMers from the labs talking about the intricate technology of a particular product set and the direction of that product set. But I think the most valuable thing for me, certainly, and for a lot of customers, is hearing other customers. What was the problem that they had? How did they address that problem? What kind of results are they seeing? And there were over 350 of those kind of sessions, similar to what you just saw here. And sometimes, and while we were at Impact, that was obviously professionally produced, but while we were at Impact, we did sit to some customers down and actually, recorded them. We had a set of questions that we could ask, and from that, it was an hour session that customers would volunteer for, and that we're going to be building like 3 or 4 minute videos that we're going to be putting out on the website, putting on YouTube. And you'll be able to see other customers, what they've done. So it often helps you to reckon, hey, that's the problem I'm facing, and talking to customers rather than just taking my word for it. But that's the reason why we show other customers rather than just show ourselves. All right, so combining BPM and rules. The rest of these go fairly quickly, by the way. Combining BPM and rules. So process management is obviously, here I'm talking about, it's defining and orchestrating the end-to-end process. So what it's really concerned with, it's hard to see that this is bolded, but the operational efficiency of an organization. Whereas business rules management is concerned with the operational intelligence of an organization. So it's synergistic. It's not overlapping really at all. It's the ability to say at this point, I need to make a decision. That may be right now a manual task. It may be actually putting up a screen, trying to bring as much information to that screen as I can so that the experts can work on that and come up with a decision. And I may be able to replace that with an actual decision service, right? If that can be codified, then maybe I can leverage that expertise in that person and turn that into a decision service which will make my process more efficient. So it's really about creating codifying the operational intelligence and then codifying the operational efficiency within my organization, and then providing visibility over both, right? So here's some examples, and you'll see that compliance oversight is in both, so there's a process perspective to it, obviously. There's a regulatory and therefore a rules perspective to it. So there's a variety of different examples, and you'll get a copy of these charts. Don't feel like you have to write everything down. And here's an example of the two being used together. I don't have a video for this, but Health Now is I think the largest health provider in Western New York State. And again, similar kind of problem that you'll see that reiterated a lot. Very manual intensive processes, very document intensive, lots of legacy systems, mainframe systems in this case, where a lot of this information is kept. And so very, very inefficient for managing just about, all of the aspects. So member enrollment, but also, eligibility, all of the various things that go on with, member interaction for Health Now. So they leverage WebSphere BPM And this, they really started with WebSphere Process Server in this example because they had the legacy issue. They wanted to start, okay, I recognize the value of a service-oriented architecture upon which to build my business process management strategy. That's how they started from an IT perspective. Simultaneously, they recognized that they needed to, from a regulatory perspective, they really needed to get a better grasp not only on making sure that they were executing decisions according to the latest regulations, but that they could prove it, right? This was really critically important. It's not that they were necessarily getting fined a lot, but there was risk for them by not being able to have a full audit trail of how decisions were made, especially when you're talking about life or death decisions. All right, my last pattern is business events with business rules. I've talked a little bit about business events. So it's always represented, or at least we do it, representing it by this funnel. This idea that I've got disparate things out there that can generate events. I've got within my infrastructure, so I've got application events that are happening. I've got outside my infrastructure, I've got people calling in, I've got people on my website. I've got a variety of things that all represent different events that on their own may have meaning, but there may be meaning across events and across a period of time. And I need to see, oh, I got A and I got B and I got C. That's interesting, and it's all from the same customer over the course of the last 24 hours. Maybe I should reach out to that customer and give them a call. It's that sort of idea. And it's synergistic with this, like when I discover a need to do something, what is it that I do? And I would execute a decision service perhaps. What's the best thing to do when I have this situational, when this situation occurs? And notice that arrow is raised because rules firing can also be events that could be captured here that could be along with other things going on. I may be detecting, I'm having a lot of claims suddenly showing up in this area of the country. Maybe there's something going on here that I can be a little more proactive about because I'm seeing a pattern across that I might not otherwise see, especially if it's crossing different departments. I might not see a pattern across departments because I've got people very special purpose built on just solving their immediate problem, not recognizing it's part of a larger issue. And so here's some examples. Product promotional offers are an obvious one. Imagine somebody coming into your website, somebody making calls, somebody going into a store. If I'm in retail, that's definitely an interested person that may want to buy. I may want to proactively offer them a discount, for example. Fraud determination is a clear one too. If someone's changing their PIN and making a large withdrawal over several ATMs in a short period of time, that's an interesting behavior. It may not be fraud, but it may be fraud, right? So I may have a beautiful process built out for fraud investigation, but when does that process get kicked off? And it could be a variety of different situations that may be potential fraud. I may think of new ones over time, but my fraud investigation process would be the action that I would kick off, and that fraud investigation process would clearly have decisions in it as well. So here's an example, credit card application. I've got multiple processes kicked off because of a credit card application going on, but then through a variety of these events occurring because of these processes, all tied to the same ID, a particular customer, I may go, wait a minute, all of those things happening kind of over a short period of time suggest that I may have a fraud. So the first thing I do then is I interrupt all my existing processes for that particular customer so that they all pause, and I immediately initiate my fraud investigation process, which may be to call the customer and say, hey, we're noticing a lot of activity here. Is that you? And it may be, yes, that's me. It may just be unusual and they decided to do a round-the-world cruise or something. But if it's not, right, I've caught that before it's too late, before a lot of money has been involved. And that's the value of leveraging all these technologies together. So the process is what I do. The events tell me when to do it, and the rules tell me how to approach it. So here's an example. So we saw that synergy. Another little IBM advertisement, but at the end of last year we announced something called WebSphere Decision Server, which is the integration of our business event software called WebSphere Business Events and our iLog JRules software together in one offering called Decision Server. And here's an example. This is a Southwest utility, a large utility in the Southwest that was implementing a smart meter program. And if you're familiar with smart meters, it's the the new intelligent meters on houses that can help determine usage and also put excess capacity back in the grid. Pretty exciting stuff. But the other aspect of that is each one of these are now devices on the network, right? That are constantly sending alerts about their particular status. And so the most expensive thing for a utility truck company to do is to send out a truck, right? To send out somebody to go investigate something. And they have to do that all the time with dumb meters, right? Like something goes wrong, they're sending out a truck, and it may just be, user error, or it may be on a pole rather than the meter, but the first indication they have of a problem is that the customer is calling, and suddenly they get a lot of customers, and so they've sent out a lot of trucks. The idea is that here I'm tracking thousands and thousands of these events, and I'm looking for patterns across those events that may be, these are happening more, these type of alerts are happening more frequently, and they're happening in this area. That rolls up to this, whatever it's called, transceiver thing or whatever, transformer. And so that suggests I may have a problem there. So maybe I proactively do diagnostics on that thing before I send out a truck. It's just it's an interesting way of determining what I should do next. And then as much as possible, what I need to do with this kind of information can be codified in rules so that I don't have to involve people until it's necessary to involve people, because I'm dealing with now thousands of these events that are occurring. It would just be too difficult for people to really be managing and monitoring that all the time, right? So software like this kind of filters and manages it so that I'm only dealing with things that are something that I need a person to deal with. All right, so the final part is just visibility over all of this, right? It's this idea that I need all of that technology to do that. I need that line of business collaboration. I need to have tools in the hands of the line of business so that they can quickly make these changes to my decisions. They can quickly, well, not quickly, but easily build out my processes and improve those processes, and understand that how do they improve the processes? They need to be able to define their SLAs and their KPIs and then get real-time feedback, even through their devices, right? I need to be thinking about in terms of Droid and iPhone as well as in terms of web. What is it that they need to see? What kind of information do they want? When do they want to be alerted? And then use that information not only to get real-time insight into what's going on, but also to be able to leverage it so that I can have analytics across periods of time. So I can say, how am I doing this month versus last month? How am I doing in Chicago versus New York? How am I doing with this product versus that product? All of those kind of comparisons across time, even to the point that, I don't know if we've got an example of it here. Well, here's an example of something that I wanted to talk about, but it's you don't see it on the chart, which is that I can have a KPIs, key performance indicator, but I can have predictive KPIs. So I can say I need to be in this range, but with a predictive KPI, I can say if we go along our current trends, we will be outside of that range, 2 months from now. And I can be alerted before I'm outside of the range. I can be alerted based on predictive KPI that, hey, I might need to do something. We've got a problem building here. So it's that kind of notion as well. So our tool for this is called Ibm Business Monitor. So clearly, Ibm Business Monitor comes pre-wired for a variety of our own technologies, but it also works with third-party applications. So means it can work with our competitors' products. It also means it can work with your own applications that you have inside your house. If you can get to the point where you can put an XML message on a JMS queue, then there's a wizard that this is an IT tool from that perspective. If you can get a JMS message on an XML message on a JMS queue, then there's a wizard in the tooling here that allows me now to start to introspect that and then bring that into this environment so I can leverage all the pre-built widgets that give me all of these nice dashboards, and I can not only have insight into my existing applications, in a process context I can have that insight, so that now that I am giving visibility not only to the end-to-end process that may be running in IBM Business Process Manager, but all of the ancillary applications and systems and queues and everything that may be part of that process. And so if there are failures there or interesting events going on there, I can see that in that same process context here. And the only thing I'll mention about the latest release 7.5 is that it now comes with Cognos business intelligence software built in. So that when I'm doing analytics on the information that Monitor is capturing about my business processes, I've got all of the capabilities to do true analytics against that data, leveraging the full power of the Cognos engine. So it's full Cognos, but you're only allowed to use it with the data that Monitor is creating. However, you can expand it with a Cognos license to everything in your organization, and then Monitor is just one of the applications that feed your analytics. But this is obviously critically important from the point of view of, with this information, I need to be able to digest it so I can use that information to help improve my processes. So I can drill down on some of these charts to get at more and more detailed information. So my last customer video talks a lot about what I was just describing there in much better terms than I did, which is really about measurement and visibility.
Bank is seen as a very traditional bank, a very solid bank, but at the same time one of the most innovative banks in Portugal. It has been proved through its principles of always focusing on the customer, seeking to be the most efficient bank, and actually use that efficiency in order to be able to bring better products and that create value to customers.
One of the main goals in BES, one of the strategic goals, is the customer satisfaction. We need to go deep. We need to measure everything. We measure customer satisfaction and mystery shopping. We measure all the SLAs. Measure is the magic word.
There was a challenge that was put forward to us, to the business and to IT, to be able to open an account in front of the user in 20 minutes.
This means, for instance, in terms of Bpm, understanding what are the processes, what is key in the processes, what business wants to achieve, and then finding the right technology that fits and gives at the right cost the right results.
If you seek to be customer-centric, customer-focused, most of them require you to be a very efficient provider. We have deployed Bpm in a way that enables a specific business area to deploy quickly processes and to code these processes with very user-friendly tools with minimal intervention from IT.
Business people get control, get less risk, and finally they are more agile. IBM has a technology and has a vision. Bpm has a need and has a vision, and we work together in the sense that we will bring this transformation of a bank.
That is a key cornerstone of our strategy for Bpm here at BES. For us, Bpm is not about IT. Bpm is about putting tools in the hands of users, so the customer really sees the impact in terms of its day-to-day business with the bank. Bpm is key not only to our IT strategy at Predictive Center, but also to our business strategy.
Now these guys were actually helped us with our strategy. Interestingly, they had purchased both WebSphere Process Server for those left-hand side, and they had Lombardi before we had purchased Lombardi. And a lot of what he was talking about, putting the tools in the hands of the line of business, was really what he was doing with Lombardi. They had the WPS stuff, the IBM Process Server stuff first, and they had some great wins with it. But they weren't able to get that next grasp. It was just too complex for the business users, right? So they recognized that they needed something better. And we went out there, and they were great, and we did a whole analysis which really helped to crystallize the vision for what became Bpm 7.5. How do we bring these two together? Because they recognized the need for both. And they helped us actually all the way out to the long tail, which is the fact that Lombardi Blueprint, which has become IBM BlueWorks, what's new about BlueWorks that Blueprint didn't have is the ability to actually automate processes from within that same environment. So to capture even simpler processes than you're likely to even want to use in the main Lombardi tooling, what's now called Process Designer, is now you're able to do that right from the BlueWorks environment. So I'm using Blue Process Discovery and then picking off kind of the low-hanging fruit and automating directly from there and not involving IT at all for those kind of processes. And I'm talking very, very simple processes. But there are many, many instances of those types of processes within an organization. So it's kind of fun to watch how quickly that can be deployed and gain process efficiencies all by putting tools in the hands of the line of business. So where you started, and actually your first question was really, I was already thinking ahead to this slide because that was a great question. This would have been the time to ask it though, so next time, now you know. But it's like, where do you start? And the idea is, start by identifying that first process, right? And that requires process discovery. So you got, there's just no, I mean, if you think about it from a Six Sigma perspective, it's interesting. Unless you have an end-to-end view, and I've seen this happen, I can have within my department, I can see all kinds of inefficiencies in the process that I understand. And I may be the one that shouts the loudest, right? Or I may have the best relationship with the CEO. So I get the budget, right, to improve that process, my parts of the process. And it's clearly inefficient. I understand that really well. And I do it, I implement it, it costs lots of money, and my overall process doesn't improve one iota. Because it turns out that that was not the bottleneck, right? That may have been bad, but that wasn't really what was limiting my process. It was either being limited ahead of me or behind me in some other department I knew nothing about, who didn't shout it as loudly as I did, right? And overall, I didn't improve it to the customer at all. And so, you know, maybe I get fired or, you know, demoted or whatever, but worse for the corporation is that BPM now has a bad name, right? It didn't work. You know, had all this promise and it just didn't work. So it's really important that I do this first, that I don't try to shortcut understanding my business processes. And that's why it's so important, that simplicity is so important. I need to make that exercise, if not fun, like it kind of is fun, but I need to be able to do it efficiently with the people that have that expertise. And then from there, grab what is going to be that initial project. And make sure, like I said, 90 days is a good target. I'd say 90 to 120 days, certainly not more than 180 days. I want to be able to show value back to the business. And one of the nice things about the way the tooling works with Process Designer, this notion of playbacks, is that I'm never more than a week away from being able to show to my stakeholders what I've done and what we're going to do next, right? It's not a big deployment process, and you're going to see that in the demo, how important that is. It's not a gimmick. It actually is kind of part and parcel with how to make this work. So I can bring stakeholders in and I can show them progress. And the other thing that this does, and you guys on the line of business side may be familiar with this, when you finally get your project approved, it's really, really hard to limit everything you want, because IT will say, well, we'll do that in version 2, and you know version 2 is never coming, right? So you're going to say, no, I need this now, and you get that scope creep, right? Because they want everything in version 1 because they have no idea. It was so long to get approval for the project in the first place that they don't have any belief that they're going to be able to do that again. They may be in a different job by then, right? So they want it all now. And one of the nice aspects of this playback, this kind of instant feedback that you're giving, is that you kind of remove that notion. You do now believe that I don't have to have everything in that first release. I have to show value in the first release, and I have faith that there will be a release 2 and a release 3 and a release 4. In fact, on a fairly short time frame, I'm building with that intention in mind from the beginning. It's not your typical kind of waterfall project. And then finally, of course, these successes, as I said before in answering to your question, that's what can then build out a program. You're proving the value as you go, you're gaining budget as you go, and remember that One Sigma improvement, that both IT and line of business. And then specifically, how do you start? Obviously, I would say there's nothing else like this, honestly. And it's really cheap to start. First of all, it's free for 30 days, but even after 30 days, we're talking about $50 a month for an author, $10 a month for just a participant, somebody that would be a stakeholder in a process, but not necessarily somebody that's doing the modeling of the process. And you can pay with a credit card, right? This is not a big software purchase, and it's instantly available because there's nothing to load. You're just exercising it in the cloud. Full security, but you're exercising it through the cloud. So it's instantly available, and you're going to see this in the demo. So with that, I think we'll take a little break. Well, I'll open it up for questions. It's 25 after 10. So what do you think? Would we take a break and then start at 1:45? I'm not really sure what the agenda would be. Oh, so no break. Sorry, guys. You have to sit there. Okay, there is a break. Oh, very nice. Okay, so I'll open it up for questions while Bill is giving you your quick preview then, and then we'll have a break. Well, you haven't been shy about asking questions, so if there, don't feel like you have to, of course, but I will be here, and obviously I think as you see the software in action, other questions may arise.
Okay, so Greg, I'm going to go ahead and switch the mode here.
Yes.
Top right corner.
Okay, hide where those 3 lines are.
You do it. Okay, great.
You want me to move my laptop as well?
No, that's fine. We can do that after the break.
Sure.
So let me give you a feeling for what we're going to be doing after the break from a demonstration standpoint. We're going to bring what Neil talked about to life and show you how it works in action. And some of what you'll see will establish how it's both business palatable and IT savvy. It facilitates both constituencies to better collaborate on the BPM space. So for instance, in BlueWorks Live, we will use several different modes of process modeling to get an idea of the activities in the process and the details related to those activities, with specifics like who cares about the process being done correctly, what systems are involved, how much money it costs, what the cost is and the time and the inputs and outputs, the challenges that people encounter, information that folks have about the process, and a dialogue about what makes up the process, as well as a view and an ability to do full-fledged process modeling in the cloud with BlueWorks Live. The other thing you'll see after the break are the kinds of documentation that you get out of your modeling in the cloud. We create, for instance, PowerPoint documents based on everything you do in the cloud. So with zero effort, you can take all of your work in the cloud into a business meeting where folks are more interested in using familiar business formats like PowerPoint documents, like Word documents, things like comments that are made online in the cloud are captured in a Word document, including the details of the process and the attachments that people put into the process and the problems and challenges that people highlight in the process. So we'll see after the break how we use this BlueWorks Live environment to really go from zero to hero is one phrase that's been heard. You know, start simple and grow fast. In a morning session, a couple of hours, facilitate the process stakeholders made up of a small number of business and IT folks to actually document the process, come to consensus, and then literally enable them to contribute to the process with almost zero learning curve. And there'll be a lot of interesting collaborative scenarios when we get into this, because more than one person can actually use this at the same time for near real-time collaboration. And then we'll take that into this is kind of the modeling for documentation environment. We'll take it into a modeling for execution environment where in here we add more detail to the process. And we do that using a BPMN palette, a business process modeling notation palette, by dragging and dropping things into the process and wiring those up into the process in a way that's simple and palatable to folks that have used nothing but drawing tools. But what we'll find is that in this environment, it does a whole lot more than just draw the picture of the process. It actually runs the process. And when we see the process run, it runs a way that we get real-time visibility into the business performance of the process, the work that's being done, what's on track, at risk, and overdue, based on what business stakeholders need to know about the process, things like SLAs and wait time and responsiveness. What is the health of the process? And then from an analysis and optimization and continuous process improvement standpoint, we're going to visit some heat maps that show us how the process worked and the percentage of work that went through the process, like in this manager approval, 53% of the time it's approved and 32% of the time it's rejected. What can we do with that information to further optimize the process? So we're going to get a real comprehensively concise tour of how we balance simplicity with sophistication, how we use these tools, both the cloud-based tools and the BPM platform, to engage between business and IT and build out a solution that in BlueWorksLive.com you can get value out of it in minutes or hours. And with the IBM BPM platform, over the last 10 years, the average time it's taken us to go from nothing to a production application that end users use and you get business value out of is 90 days. Sounds too good to be true, right? So my goal is to show you enough about how the software works so that you leave here with a confidence level that says, okay, now I understand enough about it that 90 days is not too good to be true. I can see how 90 days is realistic to do something real that has real business value. So that's some of the stuff we'll cover after the break. It's about just a tad after 10:30. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll start up at just a little bit before quarter till. So let's make sure everybody's here by about quarter till. We'll start right up. Thank you.